The first thing Daniel Carter noticed was the way her hands trembled. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to stop what they were doing, but enough that a carton of baby formula nearly slipped from her grip. Daniel stood a few feet away in the brightly lit grocery store aisle, dressed in a tailored coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He wasn't supposed to be here himself. His assistant usually handled errands, but something had drawn him in that morning. And now, without knowing why, he found himself watching a young mother quietly put the baby milk back on the shelf, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had just been placed on them. Her name, he would later learn, was Sarah Miller. Sarah pushed her cart forward with slow, careful steps. Inside it sat a small bag of rice, a loaf of discounted bread, and a few cans with dented edges. A baby carrier hung from the side, empty at the moment, but Daniel could imagine the tiny child who belonged there. He noticed how Sarah avoided eye contact with everyone, how she kept her head down as if hopping the floor would swallow her whole. When she paused at the end of the aisle and wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her worn sweater, something tightened painfully in Daniel's chest. He told himself it was none of his business. He had learned long ago not to get emotionally involved. Daniel Carter was a self-made millionaire, a man who had clawed his way out of poverty by building walls around his heart. Empathy, he believed, made people weak. Yet as he watched Sarah walk toward the checkout with a cart that was clearly missing the most important item, he felt those walls crack. At the register, Sarah counted coins from her purse with shaking fingers. Daniel stood in line behind her, pretending to scroll through his phone while watching every movement. The cashier, a young man named Mark, gave Sarah a polite but tired smile. When the total appeared on the screen, Sarah froze. She quietly asked him to remove one item, the loaf of bread. Her voice was barely audible. Daniel clenched his jaw. He could feel anger rising, not at Sarah, but at a world that allowed moments like this to exist. Sarah paid, thanked the cashier, and left the store. Daniel waited a few seconds, then followed. Outside, the winter air cut through his coat, but Sarah didn't even seem to notice the cold. She adjusted her thin jacket and began walking down the street, pulling her scarf tighter around her neck. Daniel hesitated. Following a stranger felt wrong, intrusive, but something told him this wasn't about curiosity. This was about choice, about whether he would turn away like everyone else had, or finally face the parts of himself he'd buried years ago. He kept his distance as she walked past old buildings and boarded-up shops. Eventually, she stopped at a bus stop and sat down heavily on the bench. Daniel watched from across the street as she pulled her phone from her pocket, stared at it for a long moment, then put it away. She leaned forward, resting her face in her hands, and began to cry. Daniel crossed the street. "Excuse me," he said gently. Sarah looked up, startled. Her eyes widened with fear, and she instinctively pulled her purse closer. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, "if I'm in your way." "No, no," Daniel interrupted, holding up his hands. "I didn't mean to scare you. I saw you in the store." Her expression hardened. Shame flickered across her face. "I don't want trouble," she said softly. "I'm not here to cause any," Daniel replied. "I just wanted to help." Sarah shook her head immediately. "I can't take charity." Daniel felt the weight of her words. "What if it's not charity?" he asked. "What if it's just one person helping another?" For a long moment, Sarah didn't respond. Then she laughed bitterly. "People say that all the time, they don't mean it." "I do," Daniel said, surprising even himself with how certain he sounded. Sarah studied his face as if searching for a hidden motive. Finally, she sighed. "My baby's name is Noah," she said quietly. "He's 3 months old. I lost my husband last year. Car accident. One minute he was there, the next he was gone." Her voice cracked. "I work 2 jobs, but it's still not enough. Formula prices went up again, and I thought I could stretch what I had at home. I guess I was wrong." Daniel felt a familiar ache, the same one he'd felt years ago when his own mother had stood in a grocery store, making impossible choices. Memories flooded back. His mother, Rebecca, skipping meals so he could eat. the eviction notices, the nights spent listening to her cry when she thought he was asleep. "I know what it's like," Daniel said quietly, "to feel like you're failing when you're doing everything you can." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time her eyes softened. Daniel offered to drive her home. After a brief hesitation, she agreed. Her apartment was small and cold, with peeling paint and furniture that had clearly seen better days. Noah lay sleeping in a crib by the window, his tiny chest rising and falling. Sarah watched him with a mixture of love and fear. "I don't want him to grow up like this," she whispered. Daniel knelt beside the crib, feeling something shift deep inside him. "He won't," he said, "not if I can help it." That night, Daniel made a decision that would change both their lives. He arranged for groceries to be delivered every week, including formula, diapers, and fresh food. He paid Sarah's overdue rent, anonymously at first, until she confronted him with tears in her eyes. "I didn't ask for this," she said. "No," Daniel replied, "but you deserve it." Still, the challenges didn't disappear overnight. Sarah struggled with pride, with fear of becoming dependent. Daniel struggled with his own past, with the guilt of having so much when others had so little. They argued at times. Sarah insisted on finding better work. Daniel insisted on supporting her education. Eventually, Sarah enrolled in a nursing program, juggling classes, work, and motherhood. There were nights she wanted to quit, nights when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Daniel was there through it all, not as a savior but as a steady presence. He babysat Noah, attended Sarah's graduation, and cheered louder than anyone when she passed her exams. Years later, Sarah stood in her own home, watching Noah run through the yard, laughing. She was no longer struggling to survive. She was thriving. Daniel sat on the porch, older now, but lighter than he'd ever been. "I never thanked you properly," Sarah said, sitting beside him. Daniel smiled. "You don't have to. You reminded me who I was before the money, before the walls." He looked at Noah, then back at Sarah. "Sometimes," he said, "all it takes is noticing, one moment, one choice." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "You followed me that day," she said. "You didn't turn away." Daniel leaned back, the sun warming his face. "And it was the best decision I ever made." The world hadn't changed overnight. Poverty still existed. Struggles still remained. But for one mother and one child, everything was different, because a man chose compassion over comfort, and because hope, once given, has a way of growing far beyond what anyone expects.